A young Haitian immigrant is gunned down in the heart of his tight-knit neighborhood.
It can send such a shockwave to the community when one of their own gets shot and murdered in broad daylight.
It's a particularly heinous way to die. It was very, very graphic.
In their quest for answers, investigators discover a laundry list of paramours.
It's crazy, a lot of women fell after him.
It's the type of situation that just is so ripe for violence.
You can imagine when one of the ladies find out about each other, what kind of hell they can raise, because hell have no fury like a woman's scorn.
Was this a crime of passion? Or was there someone with a more calculated plot?
There were threats that were being made, I'm gonna kill you, or words to that effect.
It's a classic situation. I'm not gonna have you, no one's gonna have you.
Monday, September 4th, 2000. In Winter Haven, Florida, Labor Day weekend festivities are winding down in the Orange Circle neighborhood.
There's still daylight because it was in September, so it still hadn't gotten dark yet.
Suddenly, around 8:30 p.m., shots rang out.
Some gunshots?
Usually people would hide when something like that happened, but everybody came to see what happened.
Lewis, hold on! Call 911!
The 911 call came in right after the shooting had taken place. It came in as a black male having been shot.
Yes, there's been a shooting.
What was reported was a person down in Orange Circle HUD, and officers responded.
While police and EMTs rush to the scene, neighbors gather around the victim.
I think they were really shocked to probably find out who got gunned down.
It was pretty chaotic from the description that the officers, the initial officers described.
Lying on the ground in a pool of blood is 28-year-old Louis St. Fleur, a well-known resident of Winter Haven.
Everybody out there knew him. There was a lot of people around at the time, and when it happened, everybody surrounded him on the ground.
Mr. St. Fleur had also a lot of relatives that were in the area. I think cousins obviously were very interested in what had taken place.
Keep breathing!
The initial officers responded to the scene and found a large group of people.
Watch out, excuse me.
And it found Lewis on the ground, at first like he was on the bicycle when he was shot.
It's apparent to officers that Lewis's condition is dire.
Lewis was trying to say something, and obviously he couldn't speak.
Lewis was shot twice. It was very, very graphic.
Hey, buddy, let me get in here. Let me help. Give me some room.
One bullet struck him in the cheek and the other struck him in the throat. And he was dead before EMS could get there.
Come on, stay with me. Come on. Start me the paramedics.
They contacted EMS. It was pretty obvious that Mr. St. Fleur was dead at the time that they, so the body was not disturbed. Once they determined that he was dead.
That's an awful, awful way to go, because what immediately happens is blood is going to be going up through your lungs. It's going to be very difficult to breathe. You're going to feel as if you're drowning.
That is just so horrible. Not just the way he died, but dying in someone's arms and not being able to get the last words out. That's terrible.
Was Lewis trying to identify his killer?
The person that gunned him down, it would appear that he knew who he was. He knew who his target was, enough so that he could have gotten close enough to be able to shot him at point blank.
Louis St. Fleur was born in Haiti in 1972. One of 7 siblings, Lewis's family was poor but close.
It is a very, very poor country. The people there, however, are very family-oriented. They look after each other, and poverty is not indicative of how they hold their head up and try to be the best they can be.
Lewis was very athletic and participated in soccer. His family also described him as very caring and very friendly.
By 1990, 18-year-old Lewis moved to the United States, eventually settling in Orlando and working in the restaurant business.
He loved cooking Caribbean food, and almost all his jobs that I've known about, he worked in the kitchen. He always cooked for me.
He was a hard worker and well-liked by his bosses and coworkers.
Being a young male immigrant, particularly from a country such as Haiti, where there's a lot of poverty, when you come to America, you want to come out of that poverty. You don't want to go back. So I think that for him, being in America was an opportunity. And I think by being employed, it showed that he wanted to do things the right way in America.
Lewis may not have wanted to return to Haiti, but he did long for a large family like the one he left behind.
Although his family still lived in Haiti, Lewis was very close with his extended family who lived in the United States, and he wanted to build upon that foundation.
Lewis is like most immigrants. They come to this country and they want to better themselves. They want better for their families, and they know, this is a land of opportunity.
After a few short years, Lewis met a young woman named Betty Roberts. The attraction was instant, and it wasn't long before the couple tied the knot. Betty shared Lewis's desire for a big family, but soon the young newlyweds were dealt a harsh reality.
I just talked to the doctor.
Betty and Lewis were experiencing issues with conceiving.
That can be difficult for any woman, and that affects the relationship with everyone in the family, not only with the husband, in this case Lewis, but it does have, at times, a detrimental effect on the relationship between the husband and the wife.
Being able to provide your husband with children is almost like a duty. And the inability to provide that for your husband will make you feel like you failed as a person.
The situation put a strain on the relationship, and the couple soon grew apart.
He lived occasionally with his wife, oftentimes stayed with other people, relatives, and that lived in the Winter Haven area.
Although they technically stayed married, Lewis eventually moved out. He relocated to Winter Haven, about halfway between Orlando and Tampa.
Winter Haven is what I would describe as a pass-through city. It's a great community to live if you want a smaller community that's more family-oriented.
Lewis moved into an apartment near his cousins in Orange Circle.
Orange Circle Project is probably a more disenfranchised area. The people there are hardworking people, and some people are unemployed, but then there can be a lot of crime and things that happen in that area.
We have homicides, but we never have more than maybe 3 a year, sometimes 4. Usually homicide is not a reoccurring crime we deal with a lot, thank goodness.
By 1994, Lewis did start to build a family, but in an unconventional way.
He was married, and he and his wife did not spend an awful lot of time together. He seemed to be a man that enjoyed the company of several women, had a child.
In the summer of 2000, 6 years after the birth of his daughter, Denisha, Lewis welcomed a son into the world with yet another woman.
He has at least 2 children from 2 different women and a wife that he does not have a child with. So he gets around a little bit.
He had that effect on women that many, men don't have. When you have his full attention, you have his full attention.
Lewis was extremely charming, very charismatic. He drew you in to his charm, made you feel like you were the only person in that room.
He's a nice-looking guy, kind of tall, light-skinned. Always had a smile on his face. He was a very good person, very good personality. He never was a person that stayed down, or he was always happy about everything. A lot of women fell after him.
Although many women came and went, Lewis still made an effort to be the best father he could.
I actually fell in love with my dad. He was the best person in the world. Everybody knew him, everybody loved him, and he was such an energized person. He was a loyal friend. He used to take me everywhere he went. Of course, I knew about his wife and the woman that he had my brother from. He was out there.
But now, the young ladies' man and father lies dead in the grass, gunned down in broad daylight.
In a small community where everybody comes together and knows each other, it can send such a shockwave to the community when one of their own that they recognize and they know get shot and murdered.
What do we got?
Male shot 2 times. He was standing near his bicycle. He died pretty quickly.
It's September 4th, Labor Day, and Lewis is riding his bike in his neighborhood. 4 shots ring out, and Lewis is shot, and there is blood everywhere.
My dad was visiting his aunt, And he was probably there in her apartment for an hour. And when he left out on his bike, that's when he was shot.
As detectives examine the body, they search for clues that could point to the shooter's identity.
Definitely shot at very close point-blank range.
When you have two headshots, you're pretty close to the firearm. You can't get that kind of accuracy with a handgun at a great distance. And both shots hit the head, so the person had to have been pretty close.
To be shot at point-blank range suggests that Lewis might have known his killer.
When investigators start questioning friends and family, they'll soon realize that Lewis's inner circle is brimming with potential suspects.
Lewis had a lot of women in his life. Perhaps one of them was capable of killing him.
There was reports of him having an argument with an unknown male that night.
When it's a heated argument, how to resolve it could end up being in bloodshed.
As night falls in Winter Haven, Florida, residents there are grappling with the fact that fellow resident, 28-year-old Louis St. Fleur, has just been gunned down in cold blood outside his aunt's house.
There were a lot of people around. He was leaving the apartment complex, and someone just let off shots, and that's when it happened.
Well, there was 2 bullet wounds to the victim, and I believe 2 other projectiles at the scene were found.
One bullet went through the cheek, and I believe that ended up in a wall. The second bullet went through his neck and remained in the body as it traveled through the neck and down into the chest cavity. It's a particularly heinous way to die because from everything I know, he was alive for a period of time. He was certainly conscious and aware that he was not going to make it.
As officers scour the area for clues, detectives begin interviewing members of the crowd gathered at the scene.
First thing they do is they look to see who may have had a grief with the decedent.
So let me ask you, did Lewis have any enemies that you were aware of that may have wanted to harm him?
No, he didn't have any enemies.
Was he married?
Yeah, he was married. He had a couple of girlfriends, though.
It seems Lewis's long list of admirers was no secret to his neighbors.
Lewis had relationships with a lot of women, so detectives had to consider the possibility that one of them might have wanted Lewis dead.
Lewis being the ladies' man that he was, you can imagine when one of the ladies find out about each other, what kind of hell they can raise, because hell have no fury like a woman's scorn.
But before that theory can gain traction, buzz on the street makes its way to the crime scene. A witness says he heard that after shots were fired, 2 men ran out into the street bragging about shooting guns.
I did hear some people talking about ringing out a couple of gunshots, like 4 gunshots or something like that.
Witness said there was 2 people that came forward, said, "Did you hear that? I fired off 4 rounds. I fired off this," and that shifted that over to them.
The victim suffered 2 bullet wounds, and 2 other projectiles were found at the scene. And you have witnesses that overheard 2 people bragging about firing off 4 shots during the time frame of Lewis's death. It definitely seemed like a credible lead.
Detective, this gentleman says he overheard some guys in the neighborhood bragging about firing off 4 shots.
It was certainly a circumstance that warranted investigation, and the police had to sort out were these people connected to Mr. St. Fleur's death or not.
No, I don't know them personally, but I do know where they live in the neighborhood.
We ended up tracking that down and interviewing those 2 people that made these claims.
When detectives bring them to the station for an interview, the 2 men quickly change their tune.
There's some people out here who have given statements saying that you said you had shot. Did you say that? No.
They didn't so much admit that they said something, they just said we didn't say anything at that point, and they quickly backed away from it.
Finally, faced with the possibility of an arrest, they admit they were just bragging and hadn't fired a gun at all that weekend.
Okay, you just came out of your grandmother's apartment and made that statement. Yeah. Did you shoot at anybody? I ain't got no gun, shoot nobody.
They were trying to build their street creds by saying they were out there shooting, when actually they didn't do anything or even had a gun. And there were some search warrants done on those individuals, which found no weapons to substantiate what they were saying.
These 2 learned that lying about shooting a gun to make yourself look tough could land you in hot water.
The dangerous part about taking credit for something you know you didn't do is that they could have been charged with this offense if law enforcement, A, didn't do their due diligence and find out from other witnesses that these young men are simply being braggadocious and they had nothing to do with this, or B, there was no one else for law enforcement to turn to, and so now we have what's in essence a confession. then those two young men now are looking at murder charges themselves. So it's a very dangerous thing to do.
Detectives have chased down their first lead into a dead end. But 3 days into the investigation, a new tip comes in that points detectives back towards one of the many women in Lewis's life.
Homicide?
Authorities get a call from a woman in Tampa who says, you need to take a look at this woman's boyfriend. And they're talking about one of Lewis's girlfriends.
The girlfriend's name is Natasha Michaels, and the tip comes from a relative of hers in Tampa, just over an hour away from Winter Haven. The relative had seen the story on the news and decided to call authorities.
The tip came from an aunt of Natasha Michaels. The aunt tells authorities that Natasha's boyfriend, Dennis Simmons, could have been responsible for Mr. St. Fleur's death.
This information catapults Dennis Simmons to a primary person of interest.
The only problem is Dennis Simmons and Natasha Michaels live 7 hours away.
Natasha and Dennis actually lived in Atlanta at the time of the murder. They were high school sweethearts who had met in Tampa and had since moved to Atlanta.
During this period of about 7 years that they were together, they had a child. I think her child may have been 3 years old at the time of Mr. St. Fleur's death.
According to Natasha's aunt, Dennis had learned Natasha was having an affair with Lewis prior to his murder.
She had some relatives in Tampa. She came over to Tampa and evidently met Lewis over in Tampa at a nightclub at one time. They exchanged phone numbers.
So the focus of the police then started on what relationship, if any, did she have with Mr. St. Fleur.
The next morning, detectives head to Atlanta to speak to Natasha. She admits to her relationship with Lewis, saying they've been seeing each other for a few months.
We were able to catch her at a point in time where I think she was very emotionally engaged in what had just taken place, and I think she wanted to tell the police everything that she knew.
Can you tell me what your relationship was with Lewis?
He was my boyfriend.
They met each other. The chemistry was instant. She was overwhelmed by him. They had a relationship. It was very intense.
Their relationship progressed pretty quickly, and it went from meeting and in the courting stage to a sexual relationship pretty fast. Tosh was serious about St. Fleur.
She tried to hide the relationship from her boyfriend, who she told us was Simmons.
What can you tell us about Dennis? Did he ever find out anything about Lewis?
He found out that I was seeing Lewis.
When Dennis found out about the illicit affair, he decided to try to work things out.
He says to her something to the effect of, look, all right, we'll get through this. In his mind, at least, he's giving her a second chance. End this, and let's keep moving forward. Let's keep our family together.
He seemed to be very in love with Natasha. He seemed to care a great deal about her. And he wanted to keep that family together, and he was aware of her sexual misconduct, which he was willing to overlook it and willing to keep the family together and move on from there.
Dennis is not ready to let go of his family. He actually was willing to forgive the infidelity and actually work through the relationship.
Did Dennis ever threaten to harm you?
No,
Did Dennis ever threaten to harm Lewis?
no. Frank said he told her that he would forgive me one time, and one time only.
Detectives are confused. If the couple is reconciled, why would Dennis have anything to do with Lewis's murder? The answer comes from Natasha herself.
When I got back from Tampa on July 9th, I had a card for Lewis in my purse that I was going to send to him. He found the card in my purse. He woke me up that night. He brought me when he woke me up, asking me who was Lewis.
Where were these cards?
In my face.
Contrary to what she told Dennis, Natasha had not ended her affair with Lewis.
Try to get her to saying you can stay, forget about it, but it was a caveat of, don't talk to him anymore, no more contact, break this off.
In the relationship at times being complacent, you can start to lose yourself in some way and not being seen by your partner as someone desirable, someone feminine. And it appeared that Lewis was able to bring those feelings back to her where she felt alive, a new energy, a new life.
So you're introducing another man into the relationship. There's no way that this is going to end on a good note.
The only question now is, where is Dennis? And did he travel the 7 hours to Winter Haven just to kill Lewis St. Fleur?
Police knew the only way they were going to find answers was to find Dennis, and to find him fast.
In September of 2000, police are investigating the cold-blooded murder of popular Winter Haven, Florida resident Louis St. Fleur.
Louis was a man that was obviously very well loved and he was very well respected, and people wanted to know what happened to him. They cared about him.
4 days into the investigation, police have learned that although St. Fleur was married, he still had plenty of girlfriends.
Louis had children from different women, but it sounds like he treated them well, and it sounds like he was a part of their lives.
At first, police wondered if one of these women could have been behind his brutal death.
He had his wife, he had his girlfriends, and again, authorities need to look at this.
Louis having many love interests, that kind of revelation can send somebody into a blind rage when they thought they're the only one that mattered. So absolutely, one of the ladies could very well have killed him, pulled that trigger.
But they are now zeroing in on a different suspect. The jealous boyfriend of one of St. Fleur's recent paramours, Atlanta resident Dennis Simmons.
Even though he's in Atlanta, there's probable cause that he would want to injure Louis because he's in a relationship with his woman.
Simmons' girlfriend, Natasha, has admitted to having an affair with Louis St. Fleur.
Natasha tells law enforcement certain things about Mr. Simmons that ties nicely into the case as far as the investigation is concerned, and that is that Mr. Simmons was the jealous type, and that Mr. Simmons did not like the fact that she was going to Tampa and that she was seeing someone in Tampa.
He had a history of violence, at least from what she told us. So that, led her to believe that it was possible he could have done an act such as this. So he was so jealous.
Jealousy can make people do despicable things. So Dennis Simmons very well could have driven to Winter Haven in a fit of anger.
Within hours of speaking with Natasha, police are able to track Dennis down and bring him to the Atlanta station for an interview.
It's past Labor Day weekend. Where were you?
I was in Tampa.
Why were you in Tampa?
I was visiting my mother.
Dennis tells authorities that he was in Tampa to purchase a truck, and he needed his mom's signature to purchase the truck.
Tampa is only 50 miles from Winter Haven, much closer than Atlanta. Detectives have to wonder if Simmons could have stopped in Winter Haven on his way home and killed Louis St. Fleur.
Dennis initially told Natasha that he would be back on Sunday, but later called to say that he wasn't coming back and would be staying for a Labor Day barbecue with his family.
Simmons said he went to a theme park with some of those relatives, spent some time there, came back, joined in like a pickup basketball game, and then went over, I believe it was his grandmother's for, celebration of barbecue for Labor Day. And that's where he was that night, according to him.
Mr. Simmons, we're going to call your mother and verify your alibi. So for your sake, I hope you're not lying.
Okay.
When police question his family, they confirm that Dennis was there with them during the time of the murder.
His family said it was true, that he was with them the entire evening.
Oh, thank you very much.
If they were accurate placing him at the time of the shooting in Tampa, then he couldn't have been there.
And according to Natasha, who does not know the exact time Louis was killed, Dennis was home when she woke up the next morning at 6 a.m. For the time being, police crossed Dennis Simmons off their suspect list.
Dennis sounds like a really straight-up guy. He has a job at UPS. He has a family. He has a daughter that he cares about a great deal. It sounds like he is a very nice man, and it sounds like he's respected. He doesn't have a police record, so there's really no reason why the authorities should be looking at him.
No one that lives 6 hours away has a job that you would think that's going to come down to Winter Haven to kill somebody over they're mad at their girlfriend because they're having an affair. That's a lot of trouble to go through.
With their best suspect off the list, police return to Winter Haven and begin to dig deeper into the days and hours leading up to Louis St. Fleur's death.
At this point, the police really have their work cut out for them. Louis being such a popular man, there is many encounters that he had, which was bringing a lot of people forward in trying to look for him, prior to him getting killed.
Police soon learn there's more to Louis St. Fleur than his appeal to women.
Mr. St. Fleur was a low-level drug dealer, primarily marijuana. You know, he was the kind of person that was just kind of scratching out a living and an existence.
I do know that based on him having been a prep cook, that particularly in that part of Florida, Winter Haven area, salary is not going to be particularly substantial. It would have been difficult for him to make a living, so the lure of easy money or drug sales would be something that might draw his attention.
Could Lewis's murder be the result of a drug deal gone bad rather than a jealous lover?
Because you're living in the street, you always have to be looking around your shoulder. Wouldn't be any surprise that if, the reason as to him getting killed would have been having to be drug-related.
A lot of times, illegal drug activity breeds violence, and this was definitely something the police had to look into.
The fact that Lewis was riding his bicycle when he was gunned down further points to a drug-related motive.
It's not unusual for people to use bicycles, even though they may drive a car or not drive a car, but that area was unusual, especially at night, drive bicycles because they could get around a little easier and less chance of worrying about being stopped.
As police dig deeper, one name keeps coming up: Pierre Dupree.
They were actually told that there was an individual by the name of Pierre that had confronted Lewis and wanted to purchase drugs and wasn't able to buy any for some reason.
There supposedly was an argument about Lewis fronting him some drugs and he would not do it.
We don't know what that reason is. And Pierre said, "I'll be back," which is a pretty ominous thing to do, ominous thing to say in particular.
Pierre had a criminal history, which some of that I believe was violent.
Everybody was saying that they had a confrontation the night before, and it almost came to blows, and it may have been related to drugs, as I recall. And so they were very concerned that that had spilled over to the next day and had resulted in Mr. Dupree becoming violent and killing Mr. St. Fleur.
Unfortunately, no one knows where to find Mr. Dupree. Police put out an APB on him.
If Pierre had a heated argument with Lewis before his death, it's possible that if they find Pierre, they found the killer.
Mr. Dupree was the focus of the investigation. It's obvious that that's an avenue that needed to be investigated.
One week after the murder of Lewis St. Fleur, police in Winter Haven, Florida are now pursuing a number of leads.
You have a whodunit, which is what this was. It's really difficult because you don't know how many suspects. You don't know if one person was involved. Was there more than one person involved? And who that person may be.
One of those leads suggests that St. Fleur, a small-time drug dealer, may have been killed in a drug deal gone bad.
His lifestyle was one that lent itself to a lot of unknown people, and as a result, there could have been any number of individuals that would want to hurt Lewis.
The possibilities were endless. It could have been someone involved in his drug trade, someone he sold drugs to, or a rival drug dealer with a beef, or it could have been one of his many admirers or one of their boyfriends. There was just no shortage of suspects.
According to witnesses, St. Fleur had been seen arguing with a man around the time he was killed.
There was an individual by the name of Pierre that had confronted Lewis.
They're pointing the finger at a drug suspect, a drug person that Lewis had an argument with prior to his killing.
Pretty much people were believing that he was the person who shot Lewis. We don't know if it was relationship-wise, business-wise, or what it may be, but everybody kept saying, yes, you need to look at Pierre. He's the one that shot him. So then we began exploring that avenue.
Police have identified Pierre as Pierre Dupree, but have so far been unable to locate him.
Based on the heated nature of the conversation and what they knew that Lewis did on the side as relates to drug transactions, they felt this is probably our guy.
The timing of the argument seemed too coincidental. Everything is pointing to Pierre Dupree at this point.
As detectives intensify their search for Pierre Dupree, he gets word that police are looking for him and ultimately comes into the station on his own. During questioning, Dupree claims he was at a bar the night Lewis St. Fleur was murdered.
Time does it close? The bar, man. He got to close by law at 12 o'clock during the week. So when he left there, I don't know what exact time he left there, but he tell us, we always be driving, why you closing some motherfucker early? And he said, by law, I got to close my establishment at 12 o'clock.
They tried to put him on a timeline as to where he was relative to when the alleged shooting took place.
Did you ever leave the bar? Yeah, I left the bar. What time? I don't remember what time. Where'd you go? My sister house. Then me and my mama walked back to the bar. Everybody was already verified it. Me and my mama walked back to the bar together. My sister stayed right around the corner from the bar.
Police confirmed Dupree's alibi with his sister. but they're not ready to dismiss him based on that.
Oftentimes, the alibi is a family member or friend, so it only holds as much weight as law enforcement's willing to give it.
Still, with no evidence directly pointing to Dupree as the shooter, police have no choice but to release him.
They had to let him go. There was really nothing substantial that they could hold him on.
Even though he clearly had a motive and he was in the area, the other evidence in the case excluded him as a suspect.
The investigation grinds to a standstill, but that is about to change.
Detectives had a witness who came forward claiming he saw the shooting.
With this new witness, they believed they had the key to finally tracking down Lewis's killer.
It's been 10 days since the Labor Day shooting of Haitian immigrant Louis St. Fleur. After eliminating several suspects, police in Winter Haven, Florida are back at square one.
They had several people that they looked at, but it wasn't really moving forward as to motive or consistent with eyewitness identification or physical description, just all kinds of different problems with each of the suspects that they had developed.
But now it appears they've gotten a break. A witness named Wilson Henry comes forward and claims he may have seen the shooter.
Wilson Henry knew Lewis very, very well. He was actually his cousin.
He had a lot of contact with Mr. St. Fleur, so he had every reason to be as truthful in trying to identify the actual person that did it as anyone may have.
Police put together a photo lineup, including Pierre Dupree, and show it to the witness.
Okay, and these are mostly people that you don't know, but you recognize one of these people as having seen him around, correct? Yes, that's correct. Okay. Any chance he was the guy? No.
Mr. Henry said that it was not Mr. Dupree. He was the shooter.
I put a lot of confidence in his statement when he swore that it wasn't Mr. Dupree, Pierre Dupree, that had done the killing.
That's when we started to develop that, this isn't leading to Pierre. We need to look at some other options.
Wilson claims one of those options is a man he saw lurking around the area of the crime just prior to the shooting, a man Wilson didn't recognize.
This is a community that everyone knows everyone. So when you notice someone strange in the area, you immediately pay attention. And this gentleman, he was asking specifically about Lewis and asking where Lewis lived.
I told that guy, what are you doing here? And then he was like, I'm just chilling. I said, well, I don't know you. It's not a chilling place, so you have to leave. And then he just got up and left. Had you ever seen him before? No, that was my first time in my life I ever seen that guy.
When detectives ask him to describe the man, Wilson doesn't hesitate.
The description was black male, short hair that appeared to have like twists or baby dreads, between 5'7", 5'8".
As word gets out that Wilson Henry came forward with his account, additional witnesses begin to surface, including another cousin of Lewis's, Nelson Cooper.
Lewis's other cousin, Nelson, also saw a strange man lurking in the area the night that Lewis was killed.
You remember what he had on?
He had on a fatigue hat and a cream-looking shirt. I don't remember what kind of pants.
Did you see his hair?
He got dreads, so they were like hanging out the hat.
What kind of dreads? I mean, did they have long dreads?
Not long dreads, they were short dreads.
The description sounds eerily familiar to police, so they put together a photo lineup and show it to the witnesses.
The police officers put together a photo display. They usually have one suspect that is included in the display. And then they will get 5 others to sort of provide a genuine test for the person's identification.
Among those in the lineup is Dennis Simmons, the boyfriend of Natasha Michaels, who was having an affair with Louis St. Fleur at the time of his death.
Mr. Simmons, as I recall, was placed in number 3.
Well, I showed you a group of 6 photographs, correct? Yes. And one of these photographs looks familiar to you, correct? Yes. Okay, which photograph would that be? And they're counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And that would be number 3.
Okay, number 3.
Yes.
Each witness that had a good opportunity to take a look at Mr. Simmons was in fact able to actually pick him out of the photo array.
They identify Mr. Simmons as the person they had seen on the day preceding the murder, as well as the day of the murder.
Police head back to Atlanta to press Natasha for more details. She reveals that Lewis told her Dennis had called and threatened him a few weeks before the murder.
We called Lewis the following day. I was at work when he had called.
Okay, what did you learn about the conversation between him and Lewis?
Hello?
It's Lewis?
Yeah, what is?
You need to back off. That woman is mine. I don't know what she told you, but we working on ours, all right?
Look, man, I ain't got time for this.
Lewis said that he just called him asking why you messing with my girlfriend. And Lewis said he just hung up on him.
Not only that, Natasha tells police that she was planning on leaving Dennis and moving to Florida to be closer to Lewis.
I was on the phone with my grandmother, and he overheard me telling her that my last day was just the 15th of September. And he also found my resignation letter in a folder I had on the dining room table.
So when he realizes that she's leaving him, and she's not just leaving him, leaving the relationship, but she's leaving Atlanta to move to Winter Haven with her lover, that has to be such a blow to not only his ego, but the love that he feels for this woman.
Dennis finding out that Natasha is ready to take the daughter and leave is something that he is not ready for. His family is what he's been getting up every day for and going to work and striving for. And to have that taking all of a sudden without any kind of warning, taking away from him, he can't handle that. It is too much.
Police then go to work verifying Natasha's story. And when they subpoena the phone records of Dennis's relatives in Tampa, they find exactly what they're looking for.
The detectives were able to find, I think, 4 phone calls that were made from the home that Mr. Simmons was staying to Mr. St. Flour's home in Winter Haven.
It was more than just one. So that showed a pattern of that he did have an interest in Lewis and was trying to do something that would look like track him down.
That's a straight line. It doesn't get any more clear than that, because now what it does is it establishes that Dennis is in Tampa calling Lewis in Winter Haven.
The only question now is, did Dennis have time to drive up to Winter Haven, kill Lewis St. Flour, and make it back to Atlanta by 6 a.m. Tuesday morning?
You're talking around 9 o'clock in the evening and then 6 o'clock in the morning. That's 8 hours.
It was a tight window to travel that distance. It wasn't necessarily impossible, but it would be cutting it pretty close.
It's now been over 6 months since Lewis St. Flour was found murdered in Winter Haven, Florida on Labor Day 2000. Police initially suspected it was a crime of passion.
When he comes face to face with a woman who's gonna confront him about the other ladies, you can imagine how things can get quickly out of hand.
The fact that Lewis was also a small-time drug dealer further complicated the case, but authorities eventually turned back to the personal angle.
As I looked at the case, I got the impression that his killing was personal as opposed to job-related. We wanted to focus on the dynamics of what was going on in his life with family, friends, and neighbors and acquaintances, as opposed to, a drug deal gone bad.
Now, police believe they have his killer in their sights, Atlanta resident Dennis Simmons, whose girlfriend Natasha was having an affair with Lewis.
Dennis had confronted what he perceived to be the threat and had asked Lewis over the phone to stop seeing Natasha. And Lewis had said, no, I'm not gonna stop seeing her. And at some point in time, in his mind, he just has to eliminate that threat.
The only question left to answer is, did Dennis have enough time to drive from Tampa, where he was visiting family, to Winter Haven and then back to Atlanta by 6 a.m. the next morning?
We knew that the shooting had happened between 8 and 8:30, and we knew that he was in Atlanta the following morning. So it was important to establish at what time he got to Atlanta. He had more than enough time to be able to drive from Winter Haven to Atlanta, which is probably about a 7 or 8 hour drive.
Which means, although it was tight, he did have enough time to commit the murder.
It was more than possible he could drive from Winter Haven to Atlanta, because you're talking around 9 o'clock in the evening and then 6 o'clock in the morning. That's 8 hours. And you're looking at overnight when there's less traffic. So you can be in Atlanta in 7 hours, and that's driving the speed limit and making stops along the way. It was more than doable.
At this point, law enforcement feels that they probably are on the right track.
On April 17, 2001, police arrest Dennis Simmons on charges of first-degree murder.
The case went to grand jury in April of '01, which was about, 8 months after the homicide, that we were able to obtain an indictment for first-degree murder.
His trial is set for January 14, 2004.
It's mostly circumstantial. Those cases are not slam dunk. They're sometimes very difficult to prove.
And as the trial date approaches, it looks like it's going to be even more difficult than prosecutors had bargained for.
As the case is preparing to go to trial, Natasha disappears. Police can't find her, so it's very alarming not to be able to find Dennis's girlfriend right before trial.
Without her, they'd have no case because his motives is based on what she's claiming occurred prior to the incident.
Authorities learned that prior to the trial, Natasha had visited Dennis in jail.
There was some communication between the two, and Natasha later revealed that Mr. Simmons had told her that if you show up for the trial, I'm going to be convicted.
Natasha obviously cared for Dennis. For her, when the relationship ended, she didn't stop caring for her child's father. It would be a struggle to have to testify against your child's father and be the cause of sending him to prison and your daughter not being able to see her father every day.
Natasha, her life has just crumbled. Natasha must be experiencing a lot of pain, anger, and uncertainty about her future and her daughter's future.
But prosecutors aren't about to watch their case fall apart because their primary witness is having second thoughts.
Prosecutors were also able to obtain a material witness warrant for Natasha Michaels.
So she was arrested pursuant to that warrant, taken into custody, and then transported back to Polk County, literally on the eve of trial, where she was detained by the judge until the trial had been completed.
Although given reluctantly, Natasha's testimony is captivating.
She tells the truth, and her testimony is so compelling that the man that she had a relationship with, that she has a daughter with, killed her lover, that he was consumed with rage.
The prosecution claims that it's the contact between Dennis and Lewis that ultimately leads to the murder.
There's no other reason for him to show up at relatives in Tampa and call somebody he doesn't even know, has never met.
And the importance of that is that it lets law enforcement know that there's no other reason for two men to be communicating that don't otherwise know each other unless there's a problem. And the commonality between those two men is Natasha.
I think when the time came on Monday that he either had to do it or go back to Atlanta, that he decided to do it.
Mr. Simmons calls Natasha and he says, "Give me the address of that blank blank." Natasha refuses to give up the information, but she calls Mr. St. Fleur and says, "Look, Mr. Simmons wants your address." Mr. St. Fleur says, "Give it to him." Now, why he said that, we'll never know.
On the evening of the murder, Dennis waited in the shadows for Lewis to appear.
He absolutely hunted him down. He made it a point to figure out who he was, where he lived.
As Lewis got on his bike to leave, Dennis made his move.
Dennis cannot stand the thought of losing her to another man, and he kills him.
For their part, the defense tries to convince the jury that it was drugs, not jealousy, that led to Lewis's death.
The defense is saying that Lewis was a drug dealer, and drugs and violence go hand in hand, because when you are dealing in drugs and you're dealing in a life of violence, and that's what happened to Lewis.
The defense points to the fact that Dennis's family claims he was with them in Tampa the whole time. But on the stand, there are conflicting stories.
His family can't seem to get the timeline correct in terms of what time he was where.
I think that his family wanted him to be there, and they wanted to remember him being there. They were simply mistaken.
Their inconsistent timelines, in conjunction with the phone records and eyewitness accounts, were stacked against Dennis Simmons.
On January 22, 2004, the jury finds Dennis Simmons guilty of first-degree murder.
He did not seek the death penalty in Mr. Simmons' case, so the judge was left with the only alternative but to sentence him to life in prison without parole.
In the end, the attractiveness so many women found in Louis St. Fleur proved fatal for him and left two families torn apart in its wake.
This verdict brought out so many emotions in both families. There really are no winners in this case because both families lost someone they loved.
I don't know that man. I don't know him. Maybe he was in love at the time. Maybe he was trying to protect his relationship, but I just know that my dad is gone and he's not coming back.
When you put three people in a relationship, it's never going to end well. And in this case, it ended tragically and very sadly. This is a crime of passion at its core.